So once again, welcome to this meeting. In the last lecture, we have covered up the software practices, processes, and we saw the approaches people follow up. And in today's lecture, we're going to focus more on the Agile Development, which is the main one followed up in our industry. In the last couple of years, we see Agile Development quite a lot. I would say 6-7 years now. It's been a dominant approach ever since the mobile industry raised. More than 6 years, actually, 10 years maybe. So Agile Development has taken over. First thing I'm gonna ask you before continuing, can you all hear me properly? If you can type on the, yeah, cool. That's very good. So what I'm gonna do in this course is talk about the practices, and in the next course, I will also put a case study that we need to discuss now. Instead of me talking all the time here, now we're gonna kind of like make it like a discussion-based stuff. So you are going to talk in the next lecture, and we're gonna do a case study. But in this lecture, I'm just gonna go through these discussions again and do the lecture. So today's topic is, once again, is Agile Development. We're gonna look into Agile Development techniques, some project management features, Agile and plan-driven methods, and how we can apply Agile Development to large projects, which is still an kind of like active area. So let's go into the first part. We saw plan-driven development before. A plan-driven development approach is very structured, very divided and manageable approach. In here, the focus is actually delivering management and an easy approach to follow up the progress of the project. So that is why it is plan-driven. So the every single stage is basically recorded, documented, and it's like going into a structured way. So in this kind of approach, you have very divided, very how do I say? It's a very management-wise structured division for every single step, such as the requirements, design, development, testing, in order to make these steps manageable for the CEOs or for stakeholders. You kind of like stop, you refine, you iterate on these steps, you document your progress, and it just goes on a deadline-based approach. So it's like everything is just has a deadline, and you gotta meet those deadlines no matter what. And that is the plan-driven approach. It makes the projects more manageable for bigger people in the industry, such as the stakeholders, such as the CEOs, managers. They can track down the progress, because imagine that dozens of people are working on the same project, and you cannot track them down individually, obviously, if you own a big company or if you are a big company. So what they do is each department, each team generates a report, and then the CEOs go over all those documentations. Okay, that's how it goes. And that is plan-driven development. Unfortunately, this doesn't work very well in our industry, because by the time that you generate those documentation, those reports, it could be actually too late for you to address them. So you just keep going on and on, just like in the waterfall model, until you reach to the very end. And then once you have reached to the end, then you can go back. So a waterfall model is a perfect approach to display how plan-driven development executes. Okay, someone is saying that I think your microphone is active at both pages. So it's like echoing. Okay, I'll just stop one of them. It's perfectly fine for me. I think you are now muted. Yes, I think I stopped it, so you should be able to hear me now properly. As for the agile development, also called rapid application development, that was the old name. Now we don't use rapid application development that much. It's called agile development or agile software development. And these are the processes that kind of like completely ignores the documentation or minimizes it and focus on implementation and releasing the software with the limited features that it has. So, and you can get the feedback based on those limited features and go into a next iteration for a new version. So iterative development is actually like the mother or father of agile development. So all of those features that you have seen in the incremental development are also valid for agile development. So we can kind of like take the agile development as a subcategory of incremental development with some distinct features here and there. Now, the software is not delivered as a single unit, but it is delivered as increments, with each increment including the functionality. So the system is delivered as a unit, small units, rather than a whole package. It is delivered in versions. Agile developments are there are specific management methods that are developed for it. Okay, so that the progress could be tracked down easily, and these development methods as well as the management methods are actually dominating in the industry. So you can come across many agile developer positions on LinkedIn. I just made a research before, and I just saw that a lot of developer positions that listed in the countries that I'm interested in are basically offering agile development. They're actually saying in their job applications that they are using agile development. So what is it in here that we need to know? Well, you need to know that this software is now not developed in basically in a project or in a very plan-driven way. There are no very strict specific hierarchy structures or documentations that you need to generate, but rather you have more than one role. And now, instead of that structure, you develop the software in a fast changing environment. Okay, so that is the main difference in here. So you got to practice a lot of things at the same time, and you have more than one role. And more importantly, you go on smaller cycles rather than having a big cycle for, let's say, you got to deliver a project next year for, I don't know, 31st of August or something. You have smaller deadlines, and it is like 3 weeks development cycles or maximum a month, and then the software is released, and then you work on the next phase. That is how agile development works. So you kind of like take these steps as fast as possible in a fast changing environment and rely on the user responses to address the next version in the next phase, in the next cycles. Because the way that agile development is designed, and it is highly carrying the same features as incremental development, requirements, design and implementation usually run all together simultaneously, and you deliver the product at a fast pace and less costly way. So you kind of like try to minimize the cost, not you, but the company, minimize the cost and try to develop the software in a fast-pacing environment. Basically, all internet-based applications nowadays, particularly the ones that you use on your mobile applications, mobile phones, are developed through agile development. Probably the best examples that we can give for agile development is the mobile apps. Okay, every single app that you use in your smartphone is developed through agile development, because in every couple of weeks you get an update, right? And you try to use the application and you see like, oh, nothing ever changed. It's just them another update. And that is all only because that the software is not delivered as a single unit, but rather in 3-week cycles. Track down the softwares that you are using. You will see that in every 3 weeks or so, you get an update for that software on your application store or Google Play or whatever phone you are using. You will get an update, and of course it's up to you to do the update or not, but the software is being updated. That is because the agile development cycles are actually completed in 3 to 4 weeks time, and hence a new version is aired. In a fast-pacing environment, because the technology changes so rapidly, so much, that the agile development has started and it's just very established nowadays. This is not a new terminology. Actually, agile development was named rapid application development back in the beginning of 2000s, but now it just changed its name and it's just more focused on delivering the software. Because of the availability of smart devices and the internet, it is more focused on these life cycles for the software development to be completed, so you can pass into the another one. And if you cannot do it, you just skip it. That's the big difference here. So if you discover a requirement on your logbook that there is no way that you can complete it in 3 weeks time, which is the next version, you just skip that. Okay, you don't waste time on it, and then you will release the requirements at a later phase, maybe in the 3rd or the 4th version, whenever this will be available. Up to here, do you have any questions? No questions. Okay, I'm going to continue. The main difference between the plan-driven and rapid application development is that the plan-driven goes on like a flow chart system. You see that there is a beginning, there's an end, the program is released, and then at the end, only when you reach to the end, you can go to the beginning and start all over again. Where in here, the steps are kind of like interchangeable, and the cycle, as you can see, is smaller. Instead of going to a highly structured step-by-step approach that you can only go back when you reach to the end, you actually follow up a smaller cycle as if you are developing a prototype, something we learned in the last lecture, yeah? Something we learned in the last lecture about the prototypes. So basically, what you need to focus on here is that delivering the software in a smaller cycle. So you refine the requirements, you build up the software based on your 10 or 15 requirements that you took up from the user stories or from the logbook or whatsoever. You demonstrate it to your whatever boss or the Scrum Master or whoever your manager is, and briefly use the software, and the software is released, and then the next requirements come in. They are redefined, rebuilt, demonstrated, and the cycle goes on. So that is a smaller cycle compared to the one that we see in here. So in here, you can only go back, just like in the waterfall model, when you reach to the end. Is that clear? Anyone, can you please respond to me so at least I know that you are there? Good. Fundamental characteristics of agile development. The process of specification, design, and implementation, as I told you in the incremental development, also in the agile, is interconnected. What does this mean? It means that as soon as you generate the user stories, it goes into a design phase. You start to create a design. So you skip all the documentation for it. You don't even waste time on defining the user use case diagrams or these requirement specifications like functional, non-functional, domain requirements, which you can address in what way, what are the milestones. All this kind of stuff is kind of like skipped, And what you focus in here is just that you take the top 10 or top 15 requirements on your logbook. You immediately come up with a user interface design based on your user experience research done on the previous users or whatsoever, and then immediately implement it because you only have 3 weeks or so to develop the next version. Okay, you don't have too much time to develop the next iteration that will be released, so you focus on smaller goals rather than keeping the entire thing big. You try to focus on a smaller scope. This will allow you to complete the design phase quickly and skipping the formal documentation. This is probably one of the most important features of agile development. The documentation is usually skipped. So all these formalities that you gotta provide to CEO about the reports, about the progress, so that they can track down software, is completely skipped. It makes the project less manageable for people because it's not always clear to see those developments in the application. At the end of the day, you get another WhatsApp release in 3 weeks, and nothing ever changed about it. So you, as a stakeholder, they might wonder, why am I paying these people? Like, it's the same application, it never even changes, and I'm just paying them monthly, but like so limited updates are done. For them, it's very difficult to understand why they are managing the project or why they are supporting it because it's their money on the line. So it's kind of like skipping the formal documentation creates a disadvantage for those people. It makes difficult to show that you are actually progressing. So they have to rely on your word now because of the way that the agile development is uh, designed. So for this kind of approach to work, you need to work closely with your user base. You need to work closely with basically everyone, the developers, the users, the stakeholders, and so forth. Everyone needs to rely on everybody else in order for the system to work. And one cannot exist without the other. Where in the project management, when it is structured, it could be easier for the CEOs to detect which department actually doing what in this project and make sure that they are actually profiting from this. So going down, we already mentioned the disadvantages. Customers should be willing and be able to spend time with the development team. As I told you, in agile development, you need to work closely with customers. You need to know what your customers want. Any kind of misconnection, being out of touch with customer base will obviously backfire. Okay, so your public relations need to be good in this kind of company to understand exactly what your customer needs. Individual team members may not get along to work in an intense, informal environment. Well, agile development is very relaxed, very kind of like informal working environment, but it's not for everybody, for sure. It could be very intense because you have too many roles. It could be difficult to manage for the scrum masters as well because basically you are working with smaller teams rather than a huge company. You are working with smaller people, and when they have kind of like problems, it could be very difficult to manage because you lack of a hierarchy. Prioritizing what you're going to deliver in the next phase can also be very difficult. So if your user base feedback is very close to two requirements, let's say, and you cannot deliver both of them in the next version and you need to postpone one, and because during that time some other requirements rise, it could be like you know that what the customer wants, but you will end up postponing them anyway because you can't deliver them within 3 weeks time. You might need more time to develop that specific requirement because of the industry is changing, because how you prioritize it, it could be very difficult sometimes. You need to have those technical skills here. Okay, like in agile development, because it's a very fast-paced environment, people need to know what they are doing. There is no time for you here to even for train, because the company, the software industry needs to focus on delivering the next version. Maintaining simplicity is the key in agile, and obviously this requires extra work for you. So you need to have those skill sets, as I told you. So industry nowadays run on agile development. We said that I mentioned this before at the beginning of the course in the class. We said that nowadays a Java developer cannot sit down and code all day and not even interact with any other person. That used to be the case, let's say 10, 15 years ago. You could get a job as a Java developer, sit down in front of a terminal machine and deal with only with your team or team members, just have a chat with them, do the required work, and when the 5 o'clock hits, you go away. This is not possible nowadays. There are so many things as a developer you need to understand right now. It's not only the coding. As a matter of fact, only the 15 to 20 percentage of software development is about coding. The rest is to make sure that the software is delivered on those specific platforms and working the same, to continuously test it, to make sure that it is integrated in all platforms at the same time. Mm. When you design a website 15 years ago, it will only be accessed by a browser or a laptop maximum, like from a desktop machine, basically. So we did have smartphones, but they weren't like smart like this today. They were like different. They were a very uh, uh, how do I say, primitive devices. So it wasn't a very popular approach that people would access to your website from a mobile platform. Nowadays, designing a website without considering the responsive design is something laughable, because most people would not even use a computer to access to your website. So it needs to be addressing all those media requirements. Just typing the code would not be enough. It needs to be tested from a variety of browsers, even on different platforms, such as through tablet devices or mobile phones with different resolutions. Okay, and that takes up some time. This is another reason why industry prefer to run on the agile development, because that is no longer seen as a viable way. So a developer is not only writing the code anymore, it is actually looking up on those platforms how this software is integrated, how it runs, what kind of testing methodologies can be followed to test these in a variety of platforms. What does the user actually want? What is the way of defining the methodology of defining what the user wants from you? All these things you need to understand. You are no longer a programmer or someone who writes the code. You need to be a business analyst. You need to understand how the company makes money, what kind of platforms your user base use to access to your software, and address the needs according to that. So in short, just because you are a good programmer, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a very good software engineer. A software engineer needs to understand from a lot of other things, such as infrastructure, pipelines, testing, the business ways and methodologies, even user experience, design, and research. They need to understand from a lot of stuff at the same time. And it puts more and more pressure in our industry. So when we look at the agile development cycle, we can define that cycle into those steps as well. But as I told you, this is always a cycle. It will never ever go like a flow chart that you have seen in the plan-driven development. It will always be a cycle. This is the core idea behind this course. Everything, majority of the diagrams you're going to see in this course are going to be a loop or a cycle. Because at the end of the day, if you break the cycle, you risk your software to disappear. So how does the people track down the software? Well, all those steps that we mentioned previously, like specification, like design and development, like validation, like evolution, they all happen in here as well, but you kind of like keep them small and they are not the same. Majority of the activities you'll see here will be done on the implementation and testing side. So all these stuff that you spend in the previous plan-driven development methods, such as planning, getting the feedback, doing the prototypes, demonstration, and so forth, they are actually skipped here. You try to keep the work in that space minimized, and you focus on the implementation, which is a test-driven development. You develop it, you test it, or the opposite, you test it and then you develop it, which is called test-driven development. And then the software is released, and then you go into another cycle. Okay, this is how it works. So just to summarize what we have seen so far, we can say that design and documentation is minimized in agile development. Just like incremental development, systems are delivered in versions, and you try to gain some time here as much as you can. So if there's a tool that you have already discovered and easily be adaptable to your software, why not to use it? Any reusable tools can be also be used in your software production. So the reusable method that we have seen last lecture can also be applied in agile development. It's not only the incremental development, but the idea here is to deliver the software as fast as possible to the customer so you can get feedback and work more on it. I already mentioned this. Agile is a subcategory of incremental development. What you do here is that your increments are small, typically released on the system that will be available to 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes a month to the user. The customer is primarily involved in development process in order to get feedback on the version, and the requirements will be listed. And finally, documentation is minimized. It's only done in an informal communication way. So all the formal meetings that the board meet and discuss for hours and hours, what they're gonna do in the software and stuff like this is completely just skipped and discussed in informal meetings or emails. There are some customer involvement. As we said, these are the principles. Incremental delivery software is developed in increments with the customer, specifying the requirements by user stories. This is done through user stories most of the time. And the focus here is actually teams working together. Okay, it is, I cannot emphasize this is anymore. Like, this is the core idea behind agile development. In order for agile development to work, you need to keep up the people, not the processes in front of everything. Because if those people are not working together to achieve a bigger outcome, nothing is going to work here. So in an agile development, people are more valued and less seen disposable, I guess, when compared to the plan-driven development. You need to embrace the change. You need to understand that the customer or an outside interruption or a new technological improvement can completely change the way that you deliver the software. Such as, let's say, a new device appears or a new store appears and suddenly becomes popular in a year time. You need to make sure that your software is also available on that specific platform. The success of agile development. This is a good title, I think. You need to know where this is successful and where this is not. Agile development usually do not work very well with large projects. When I say large projects, I mean when projects are delivered through hundreds of people at the same time. I am not talking about how expensive the company is that released that software, but I'm talking about how many people work on that specific project. Okay. It is usually successful in small to medium sized project. Okay. And that is the core idea. Most of the mobile applications developed today are not developed by hundreds of thousands of people. It's not like hundreds of people are working in developing a mobile application. There could be, of course, a dozen, maybe 2 dozen people working on it, maybe even three, but it's not going to be 1,000 people working on the same project like that. We develop operating systems or huge network or airport crafting systems or whatsoever. It's not going to be 1,000 people like interactive games, basically. In an interactive game, 1,000 people can easily work on because there are so many roles in there. So this is not a very good idea to be implemented on big scale projects, but it's rather more medium sized manageable projects. And the customer should be willing to provide their involvement. If they are not going to provide you any feedback, it could be very difficult to manage agile development. Before I go further, I'm going to stop in here and accept any questions. Is there anyone who wants to ask questions? Anything you did not understand? You can ask from the group chat or you can raise your hand. Is everything clear? Nothing? Absolutely perfect? Cool. Okay. It's up to you guys. I'm gonna stop in here and invite you again, okay, for the next session to discuss even more. So I'm gonna stop the meeting now and invite you. Our 40 minutes is almost up. So I'm gonna invite you again on big blue button. Please go there and I'll invite you for the next session.